Okay, kia ora koutou. That is a very, very big sigh from my end because we are having all sorts of technical difficulties with this kōrero tonight. And ironically, the theme of the conversation is about well-being. And so I have been doing all the things right now to be making sure that I literally don't pull my hair out. So thank you for those people who were waiting for us. We did say that we were going to go live on Facebook for this, but unfortunately that's one of the technical difficulties we're having as well. So we are recording this now, and I will put this up on Facebook afterwards. As you can see, I'm on my phone because that's how technically challenging it was this evening. But we do have the lovely Keri and Meg joining us for this conversation. So I would really love to introduce them both, and then I'm just going to throw some questions and guidance to them as we go through this conversation, but I know that they have a wealth of knowledge and expertise to share with you all this evening. So you won't hear too much from me, thankfully. So I'd like first of all to introduce Meg Gallagher. Meg has recently joined the Along with Education team. She's based in Otago and comes with an enormous background in supporting teachers, supporting the connection between teachers in terms of their hearts and their minds and their brain and all that goes in between. And she, being a teacher herself, has walked in it as much as studied it and lived it and breathed it. So I'll get her to share more about herself in a moment. And then we have the wonderful Keri Benefield, who many of you will, if you've been following our conferences for a little while, you know that Keri features a lot in those. And Keri has a long relationship with Along with Education, both as a parent and an educator, and more recently as a play therapist. And Keri is based in the Hawke's Bay, working for Place NZ here. So Meg, have I missed anything? Is there anything else you'd like to say or introduce yourself to? Anything you've got hot on the books at the moment?
No, that was a very kind introduction. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And Keri, anything you want to add to that before we get into our kōrero?
No, thank you, Sarah. You covered it well. Thank you.
Oh, great. Okay. So our conversation tonight, many people will wonder maybe why we're not talking specifically play in a Joy of Play conference. But I think really what I wanted to do was get the both of you together to talk about well-being, mental health, our emotional health, our spiritual health, our soul health, because it's been a rough few years, as many people will know and have experienced. And we know that play is a lovely current that runs through in order to mitigate some of those ups and downs. But we're facing a new school year, and there are continued pressures on our whānau and on us personally as teachers. So really the first question that I had was, you know, what do you think is the most important thing that teachers, if we start at this point, around that idea of building relationships at the start of the year, what's the most important thing that teachers need to consider in building those relationships, given all that's going on at the moment? Meg, I'll go to you first.
So the first thing that comes to mind for me is that the time and energy that you put into building relationships at the start of the term and the start of the year pays off hugely. I know that there's always, or it feels like there's always this pressure to get into the academics and to start moving kids and to see this progress and all this sort of stuff. But if we buy into that pressure, we miss this beautiful capture point to build the sense of belonging and connection that's absolutely vital for learning. Because if you don't have a sense of belonging, you don't feel safe in the environment, therefore you really struggle with any learning and for learning to stick because you're too busy trying to get yourself safe. And so if we build those connections right at the start and invest the time and energy, I think it makes, well, I know it makes a huge difference throughout the year.
Yeah. And Keri, for you, what would be your important thing?
I think about the curriculum, and that's what's given to us. And I guess as educators, we can focus on the how. And I think that's where the relationships happen, the choices that we make. And I think that's where the excitement comes and that fire in your belly when you get to make decisions about, how you're going to engage the kids with, and play is a great way to do that. And just remembering that, I think through that relationship building, when the connections are made, it's also about, if children are regulated in that moment, then they're going to be remembering what you're going to do, what's been done, that learning. And I'm just thinking about teachers in the past that I've had a relationship with, a connection to, and they tend to be the things you remember that moment. You're probably likely to remember the teacher as well, because you've got a relationship with the teacher, and that's what tends to stick. So I reflect back on that question and think about my own learning as a student, and the relationships I had with teachers and what gave me that connection, and generally a memorable moment.
Yeah, and I'm certainly thinking of a couple of my teachers, my favourite teachers. I don't actually remember. I mean, I know we obviously did learning and we did work, but my memory is of them as a person, and how kind they were, how calm they were. They all featured calmly in my head, and that they showed interest in me and that they knew me, and that's something that forms that connection, isn't it?
It is, yeah, and I think sometimes for us as classroom teachers, it can be quite overwhelming when you kind of get a whole new group of children. And I guess it's thinking during the day too of, how you can connect. Even sometimes you can get to the end of the day, I guess, in some of the collaborative spaces where you've got up to 50 children and you think, wow, I'm not even sure, how I connected with that particular child. But I think if we put that in the forefront of our mind and maybe plan for, and play is a great way to do that, but just thinking about how we're going to make sure we've checked in with each child somehow during the day, whether it's individually in a group, and also it depends on the individual.
And this comes back to your point, Meg, about actually creating that time to do that and prioritising that, right?
Absolutely. Like if we get caught up in the rush, we can't be that calm individual that connects with the students, with our akonga. And I love what Ellie Mooney says. She talks about reach me before you teach me. If we don't reach them, if we don't know them, it's really hard to connect the learning, because there's nothing for them to hang it on to. And, that's about building that trust and knowing that they're safe.
Yeah.
And I think that's, and it works for us too, because when students are succeeding, we succeed. We feel better about ourselves. So everybody actually does better if we've got strong relationships.
Yeah. And just, I'm thinking too, there has been an increased awareness in kids who are presenting with trauma-related injuries, if you like, and children who are harder to connect with, perhaps because of their neurodiversity. This actually means that time is even more important for those kids, isn't it? That pace of connection takes a little bit longer to happen.
Absolutely. And if we don't give them time, then potentially we are, I don't want to overuse this word, but potentially we're re-traumatizing them in some ways, because then school doesn't become a safe place for them to actually then be able to grow. And I love Paul Young, no, not Young, can't remember his last name. He talks about post-traumatic stress and then post-traumatic strength. And so for a number of our children who have been, lots of us have been through some hard times in the last few years, we have opportunities at school to actually help our children to see that they have strengths that have come through, to come through a tough time shows that you've got some strengths, and so then we can lean into those. But that means taking time to observe them and notice and recognise, and then be able to respond to the strengths that we see. So that our students can then see that for themselves.
Your thoughts on that, Keri?
I was actually just thinking, Meg, while you were speaking about, that power of connection with all the children, regardless of where they're at. And it just reminded me of a book I read by Dylan Williams, and he talked about so something like ice block sticks with kids' names on them, and you just have them next to you so that when you've interacted with a child, then you kind of put that to the side just to make sure, almost like a checklist, but a very discreet way of just ensuring that you have connected in some way, and also inviting Children, if if you've got a question or something, just maybe you just pull a name and just invite that person first, because often it's the same children can be the ones who have something to say. So just finding ways to give possibly the quieter children the opportunity to share if they want to. So I was just thinking of that while you were speaking, Meg.
That's beautiful. And the other thing that I used to do is I used to make sure that I greeted my students well and tried to greet them individually. And at the end of the day, I would always stand at the door and say goodbye to everybody individually. So it's a little bit easier when you're in a single cell classroom. When you've got 50 children all swinging past, it might be more difficult. But at least then I knew that I'd had at least one, if not two, one-to-one contacts.
Well, and I think that raises a point though about our collaborative spaces, and that it is harder to connect in that way. It can feel a little bit more chaotic at the end of the day if we don't have those systems in place. And so maybe if you are in a collaborative space and you've got your teaching team partners with you, perhaps that is a conversation around the rituals that you have, when school starts, when school ends, so that there is that connection, even if you've divvied up the kids and they go out a different door and you're standing at one door and that colleagues standing in that, some way that child has had that one point of connection in the day that you can guarantee through that ritual is also really important.
And that's where that ice block sticks idea that you talked about, Keri, would be really quite powerful, because as teachers collectively you could have a set that then you could see who's actually had contact and who's been possibly missed in the hurry and sorry of another day.
And I guess that for you, I'd never really thought of having two sets, but I think that way too, you at least know, that you've both, if there's, two teachers in that collaborative space, that you've both connected, so that you've kept the relationship with the two of you. And also at the end of the day, if there's a few names left in both of your cups, then it would be worth just reflecting on that and then maybe making it more of an effort the following day to check in with those children earlier.
And I'm also, we've talked a bit about checking in with kids and that time. I'm wondering too, though, our teacher workforce and our colleagues and the connections we have in our workplace, teachers have had it pretty rough, and it's certainly not got easier as a teacher doing this job. And I guess really I'm wondering about, I want to say self-care, but I do feel like when we talk about self-care that almost trivializes it, that it's almost like, and what are you doing? Are you going to go, meditate on your way home? Or are you going to, have a glass of wine at the end of the day? I mean, those are great, but I think there's a real case for genuine concern about teacher wellbeing and how we can support each other as colleagues in the sector, knowing what kind of job it is and potentially some of the challenges that we're facing this year. What would be some of your pieces of advice or support around that?
I quite like the term self-care, because I think of it as care for self, and it's really clear. I worked in a school as a teacher a couple of years ago, and the deputy principal would put on her Google Calendar that she had a hair appointment. And so we knew to stay away from that time. If you go to make an appointment with her, or you wanted some time, that was booked there, and it was communicated to everybody. So I thought that was quite powerful modelling, that's okay, to kind of lock that time. That's my time, and that's what I need. And I think when it comes from leadership, it's a great way to model that's really important. And that's what I do, and you'll do something different. But self-care looks very different for all of us. But I think just modelling it's really powerful, and I think that's good for us to do, for teachers to do, educators to do, for children to see as well, that we all need to do things for ourselves, and I guess that's a level of service. We can serve others, but there's also service to self, and that's we need to find what we need to do to look after ourselves, and particularly for educators who have a lot of other people to look after. That's really important. I think that self-care, and I'm quite okay with that wording. There's lots of ways to look at it, and I think mindfulness is really powerful for some people, and it might not work for others. So just different strategies.
Yeah, Yeah, and I like that. I wonder though, I can remember schools that I worked in that really had great self-care modelling and had this sense of collaboration and connection as a teaching team. And then I worked in schools where you felt you were being watched, you were being judged. You know, to be that good teacher, you had to stay there till 5 o'clock, and you had to be in there. And you know, I had to walk past the principal's office, so if I was leaving any earlier, I felt like I was being watched. Not conducive to a desire to want to work to the best, but also it doesn't really, I guess, recognise the different ways that we work as well, does it?
No, and I too, Sarah, have been in schools where it's kind of either end of the scale. I've actually taught in a school where the school would offer yoga. So as a staff, we'd go and do yoga. We could choose what we wanted to do, and there were book clubs and all these things. And it was a really happy staff, but I guess it does come down to leadership, and it does come down to time and priorities, I think, as a staff. So definitely different ways to do it. I've also been in a school where I felt like that, where I've kind of had to duck down under the window because I've had to go. I've had a really important, but it makes you feel guilty. But I definitely think that comes down to leadership, and that's why I think, you know, seeing the deputy principal with her appointment on her Google Calendar made me feel like it was okay if I needed to leave early one day, and hopefully that there would be trust that I would do what I needed to do, and it might be in the evening, you know, once the children are in bed, that we all find the time, you know, to do what we need to do. Yeah,
absolutely. Meg, your thoughts?
Well, a couple of years ago, I did my master's research focusing on teacher wellbeing, and it supports what you're talking about here. So there were, I used Te Whare Tapawha as the model, and one of the things that came through very strongly was that we need to attend to our own needs. Like self-care is about addressing your own needs in the way that works for you. So, you know, it's like when people talk about diets and all of those sorts of things, it's don't choose the trendy diet, don't choose whatever, choose what makes you feel great and what makes you, gives you energy. And so that's about knowing yourself. And so that self-knowledge was really important around the basic needs. And then when I went in further, I found there were 4 main things that really mattered. So this is quite unique in how it's presented, but there's 4 main things that matter. And the first one is about that strong ethical leadership. People who know their staff, know their team, and making sure that we're not doing self-care or doing well-being to your staff, that it's a collaborative thing and it is individual, and small things make big differences. And then it was also about relationships, because teaching is all about relationships. So that's about having positive, supportive relationships with colleagues, with students, with whānau, with our support network. So making sure that we have a support network, and that means that we have to make a bit of an effort, because often we don't nurture our own relationships in our own lives because we're too busy trying to give to everybody else. And then when the chips are down, the people that we need most in our lives maybe aren't as available as we would like them to be. So that constant nurturing of that is important. The other 2 things were self-efficacy, so knowing that you're capable, and that's an internal thing, and I can do this is what I call it. And then finally, it's about having a strong sense of purpose to come back to. So knowing why you go into school every day, knowing why you do the things you do. And being able to come back to those. And one more thing I'd say around self-care is that we often see self-care as a luxury, as something that we do in the holidays, or I'll do it in the weekend, or I'll have a glass of wine at the end of the day to shout myself because I've been so awesome, and I've got through, you know, my gazillion things on my list. But actually that's not self-care. A lot of that stuff is just purely numbing and making yourself feel better in the moment. Self-care is constant. It's about taking a breath or taking a pause before you react to something. It's about going for a walk at lunchtime to get some fresh air. It's about going and seeking help when you need it. It's about creating that positive environment around you. It's the little things that you do to nurture yourself all day. It's about making the appointment with your bank manager to organise your finances. It's about making your appointment with your doctor or your dentist. So it's not glamorous. It's not the fluffy slippers and the chocolate and the bunnies and all that sort of stuff. That's nice to have. But real self-care is actually about doing the hard things to look after yourself and putting yourself on the list.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people that aren't in education don't understand how hard it is to get an appointment during the school term, you know, to be able to go and sort out the bank mortgage or to get to the doctor or to the dentist or though. And so when that accumulates, because there are all these jobs that need to be done, and if we leave them till the school holidays, well, then we don't get a rest in the school holidays either, because we're playing catch up with life outside of school.
Exactly, and so we barely get, often people in the holidays, and I know I used to do this myself, I would get to the end of the term and my husband at the time would ask me what I wanted for tea, for takeaways, and I'd cry because I couldn't decide whether I wanted a hot dog or a piece of fish because it was too much. Honestly, I'd rather have starved. I don't need to eat anything. Just make a decision. I can't. I'm all out.
Yeah.
And so then it would take me all holidays to recover, and then I'd go back at the start of the term. I wouldn't be rejuvenated. It was just like a sticking plaster over a raw wound. That's not a good way for people to live.
No, and often we get sick as well during that time too, don't we? Yeah. So we've talked about children. We've talked about teachers. Whānau, our parent community. There's a lot going on in the community at the moment. There are a lot of families under stress. We're seeing the news at the moment around, increased things like school uniforms, stationery lists are coming out, all of that back to school cost for families is just compounded on top of the cost of everything at the moment. Where does the school sit with this? Where or how can we support our whānau to, I guess, have a sense maybe of control over this for a start, because that sense of control is empowering. But also, how do we support whānau and what are some great strategies we can use here? Keri, I'll go to you first.
So I was just, excuse me, thinking that it's human nature to seek connection. So I think if we can connect with whānau early on, however schools choose to do that, whether it's a phone call and just the importance of listening in that phone call, whether it's a postcard home, whether it's a whānau hui, I think those sort of things would help to create that connection, that relationship, and also for whānau to feel like they've been listened to.
I agree, Keri. Like there's an old quote that says that being listened to is so close to being loved that most people don't know the difference. When we truly feel heard. And, I know that teachers are under stress too, but again, if we invest that time in listening to our whānau and they feel heard and they feel understood, then that will pay massive dividends as we go through the year.
And if we connect into that self-care too, I think, it's about being clear that we're available. We're available for whānau to come in and see us, but just maybe clear on times and things as well. And that if, we might not reply in the middle of the night to a message, but I think it's just that communication piece and knowing that you're there, but also that there's boundaries. And so whānau can see that you are looking after yourself so that you can then be the best that you can be for their children during the day.
And I'm also wondering, some work that I've been doing as part of the start or lead into the school year is helping schools to think about how they communicate what parents can be doing at home for their children's learning, supporting their learning, the power of play in that, and how play is such a lovely way of whānau connecting with their children without it feeling like we're doing, a battle for homework and things like that. Are there messages that we can send our parents around how they can be engaging in that self-care and building relationships with their kids at the same time?
I think that encouraging them to be outside and in nature and explaining to them the power of time in nature, I think, is really important. Although I say that as somebody who lives in a small rural South Island town where I have access to it. It's a little bit more complex when we're in an urban centre. But even it's just being outside in the fresh-ish air is better than being stuck inside at the whole time.
Mm.
And I've been noticing my son playing video games with his friends over the holidays, Minecraft in particular. And for a start off, I was like, oh, I don't know about this, this isn't good. But I've actually been listening to the conversations that he has with his friends, and it's beautiful. And so I've been getting him to try to teach me.
Yeah.
And so he's now the expert, and I'm the learner, and I'm really bad at it. Like, I'm incredibly, incredibly bad at it. Apparently, I'm still at noob level, whatever that is. I may be there for a long time. But that's actually brought a new aspect to our life, that he's teaching something that's important to him, to me. And there's value in that, I think.
Mm.
And I think that parents, are often time pressed, or grandparents, or whoever will be raising the children or spending time with them after school. And so sometimes I recommend love bombing, which comes from Nathan Mackay Wallace, where it's just, seeing if you can find 5 minutes just to have that time to connect through whatever it is that the child wants to do. And you find yourself doing, I'm just thinking about self-care and well-being for the adult. You find yourself doing similar to what you're talking about, Meg, where you might be playing Minecraft when you might not usually be doing that, but it's actually a lot of fun, and you end up doing things that you wouldn't otherwise do that lead you to self-care in a different way. So I think just, giving whānau different ways for it to be manageable, to have that time to connect and to play. Also, sometimes setting a challenge for children at the end of the day, if there's been something that's come up through their play, just wondering if that's something that they could share at home. Or if it's a game or something that's being played at school, is that something you could introduce or share? And often the dinner table can be the best place if whānau are sitting around together, where that could be introduced or talked about. You often hear that, how was your day? Good. And that's the end. So it's just a different way of maybe prompting a discussion and encouraging, empowering the children to be the ones to start it.
Mm. Yeah, and I'm thinking too, because time is precious. I'm thinking too about some of those the whānau who maybe are working 2 jobs, or there's a change of shift between partners. One's out at the morning shift and one's at the night shift, and everyone's sort of coming and going in the house. Any tips for that connection when we're just literally go to work, come home, in order to put food on the table for some of our whānau? Any tips that can reach whānau somehow through school?
You can't love your kids too much, so tell them that you love them. Give them a hug on the way past. If they've got phones and they're open to it, text them a kind message. Let them know that you're proud of them. Even those, like you were saying, that love bombing, even those small points of connection. If you're in the car and you're traveling from one place to the other, that's a wonderful, wonderful space just to be able to talk, and more importantly, listen, or sing together. Yeah,
well, I was just thinking that often it's, Meg, you were talking about, having your son teach you Minecraft. I've got a typical teenage son at the moment who doesn't talk and just grunts. But funnily enough, the best conversations we have are in the car when we're side by side. And he's trapped too as well. He can't get away from me. But he's got quite a unique sense of music taste, and he's allowed to choose the music that goes on in the car. And suddenly he comes alive and he's telling me about this music, or he's, I'm saying to him, I've never heard this song before. Who does that? So, finding that point of connection, even if it is just in the car from home to school, singing at the top of your voices or playing the music really loud or whatever. It's those little memory moments, isn't it?
And I guess whenever the challenges. Oh, sorry, Meg, you go.
I was just going to say, I used to keep a wand in the car that I used to wave at the lights to turn them to green.
That's going to be one for the grandchildren, isn't it? They'll be saying, I remember when my mum.
Sorry, Keri.
I was just going to say, really, that I think there's always going to be challenges. And so it's just looking for opportunities in those challenges of creative ways to do things, which is what teachers are doing, as well as parents at home too. So you made me smile, Sarah, because I had a similar car ride the other day with a similar age son. And he said to me, he wanted to read and I was driving, and he said, I kept talking to him and we ended up having a really good discussion. And he said, I know what you're doing, Mum. And really, I just wanted to connect because I saw it as a great opportunity. I wasn't trying to put him off reading, but I felt that was really special time, that whole car ride. And so, but yeah, as they get older, they get a little bit more onto your onto your
tricks. Yeah. Yes. And I know the topics that I can raise that will get a conversation and topics that I get a grunt with. So yeah, that's very strategic. Yeah. Look, yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I just did want to say also to parents is just to, as teachers, we can reassure them as well, and to let them know that, you know, to be a good enough parent is better than to try and be a perfect parent and feel like you're failing.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, like everybody is doing you know, most people are doing the best they can with what they've got. And if you're doing the best you can with what you've got, then you can't do more than that.
Yeah. 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 And I think that, you know, school and our school newsletters and information going home, you know, we do have a sense of responsibility around parent education. And I do think that that helps that connection with our school community. I think that, you know, certainly those schools that we've worked with where we talk about educating our whānau, educating our parent community around how our children learn, what's great for them. I think we also have to be really cognizant of some of those messages around being an amazing parent, being a perfect parent, and all the pressure that's going on parents through social media, and what is a good parent, what isn't a good parent. So if we can, you know, get some of those messages out there, I think, you know, that's really powerful. Just, I suppose, one last question I want to talk about, if we have a think about play for a moment. I wondered if you could have a think about what, and I know, Keri, we've talked about this before, but what your ideal learning environment would be around supporting that mental health and well-being for children in the school setting, and to an extent teachers. You know, if teachers are seeing children engaged and happy and connected, then obviously that gives a sense of satisfaction as a teacher too. So to describe your ideal learning environments that support well-being in the classroom.
I think this goes back to the first question that we talked about, that we've got the curriculum, but it's choosing about how we're going to deliver it, present it, and inspire the kids. And research tells us that when children are regulated, then they will connect, and then the learning will come. And so play is a fantastic avenue, I think, to tick all those three boxes. Children are generally regulated because play is their language. You know, it means that everyone can tap into it, everyone can be part of it. I think it knocks down quite a few barriers, regardless of, you know, culture and language spoken. The play is the language. And so I think finding what a great avenue, you know, for children to feel regulated, for them to be able to make friends, and then with that being regulated and connected, then that learning will come. And I guess that goes back to Bruce Perry's neurosequential model, where he talks about, you know, the brain and how we need that part, the survival part of our brain, before we can move into the middle of our brain and the prefrontal cortex to learn. So I think play does that beautifully.
Yeah. Meg?
So if I was looking at an environment, and I think you're right, like play plays the sandpit where we can flourish. So I would love to see in an environment a variety of spaces so that children can go and have a space where they can just sit and observe before they engage, where they can regulate themselves. So nice tight spaces that people can get into if they need it, or open spaces if they need it. There's opportunity for movement, music, rhythm, all of that's great for regulating us. And that there's calm, and there's places where they can go where they can be excited. I think imaginative play is a fantastic arena to explore emotions. And as educators, part of our job is to observe what's going on with our tamariki, and where we see, you know, for example, frustration because I can't do something or whatever, being able to observe that and maybe help the child to sort of build their tolerance for frustration so that they can actually then develop the skill to be able to pursue something that's difficult. And, you know, like I know a lot of children that I'm seeing come through into school, they have a very small window of tolerance for frustration. And so we can actually provide them with opportunities to just open it a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more so that the children can feel more capable and competent. And then they can give more things a go and take more risks and live bigger, juicier, richer, fabulous lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And anything in particular that, you know, if a teacher said to you, what's a must-have to have in that learning space? Yeah, we've described play, but what are those resources, for example, that will support children to self-regulate, will support them to connect in order to be a part of that space? Keri, what if you could have one, I'd say one thing, what would be top of the list for you?
Well, this is perfect timing because I have one thing that I collected today, and I think that it's important for educators to know that often the most exciting resources are the ones that cost nothing. And so I took a wheelie bin out to Resource today. And for those who don't know about Resource is a fantastic organisation in the Hawke's Bay that collects pretty much things that are on their way to the landfill and then redistributes them to those who need them. So I contacted Resource and took my wheelie bin and have filled it up with lengths of fabric and ties and sort of bungee cords and elastic and that sort of thing, packet of rubber bands. And the reason that we've sort of gone in this direction for this particular school was from noticing last year that the children, when they were playing with loose parts, were really, really big on that dress up play. And I was, and definitely, you know, Superman, Spider-Man, all the already kind of labeled costumes have a place. But I love seeing what happens with just a stretch of material that can be turned into so many different things. So today, my resource would be a wheelie bin full of lots of different lengths of fabric. I'm quite excited about the net curtains and whether they'll be turned into wedding dresses or who knows. But I love the different, you know, the different textures. There's animal textures, there's laces, there's all sorts. So I kind of feel like when you find a resource that makes you smile or gives you that little bit of excitement in your tummy. And when I was speaking to Nadine at Resource today, she was feeling it too, and she was really excited. And so we both left excited. And this is before we've even taken it into the school. So I'm hoping that that excitement and that passion for what could be will be passed on to the children. I think it definitely comes too. I mean, if you're going in as an educator with that excitement, I felt really regulated when I was having these conversations. So hopefully that will be the beginning, and then we can build on that regulation for connection. And I'm just imagining, I'm really excited about what's going to be created, and we're going to set them up under the trees so that if the children, a packet of pegs is in there as well, the children want to make tents or who knows. And that's the really exciting thing. They'll be taking the lead. And then another wheelie bin might come next based on what's created with this one.
Yeah, brilliant. Sounds wonderful. Meg, for you, what would be your top one thing?
I want to come and play with Keri.
You are welcome.
That sounds so cool. We can make our own tent fort. One of the things, and I know this sounds super pedestrian, especially when we've just talked about this wonderful wheelie bin full of magic, that one of the lovely things to use for regulation is Play-Doh. Just to be able to sit and move it and manipulate it. We can add colour, we can add you know, herbs and things like that for scents. And it can often be quite a quiet space where people, similar to what you were talking about before, Sarah, with the driving in the car. If I'm sitting there with a child or more than one child with Play-Doh in our hands and we're just focusing on the Play-Doh, then all sorts of things come out in conversation as well. And it does have a tendency to calm us down and to help our breathing become more regulated.
Yeah, and it's the sensory nature of that too, isn't it? A little bit like the material. There's a sensory nature to the material. There's a tactileness to it, and that sort of helps down regulate at times too, doesn't it? So it's very powerful. And Play-Doh or clay or anything like that, water, sand, anything we can get our fingers on and play with and muck about with has that effect, doesn't it?
Well, it brings us back into our bodies and into here and now.
Yeah.
Help those, those intrusive thoughts that start to amp up our anxiety and things like that.
Oh, well, look, it's been absolutely delightful to speak to both of you, as always. And I know that, we've got an amazing workforce out there that are starting the year, primed and ready to go. And, I mentioned the other day to someone that our teachers, despite what the media says at times, our teachers don't start the day off thinking how are they going to ruin a child's day today. They go in thinking, how can I be of service to these kids and their families and our community? And I think it's super important to really understand that it is a job of service, and as you say, Keri, we need to be able to give ourselves that service as well and care for ourselves in the process. So I do hope that this discussion this evening has been useful for teachers, lots of good reminders and some great little tips to start the year off. For those of you who are part of our Joy of Play conference, Meg has got a presentation that she shared around, it's called Safety, and talking a lot more about this in detail, about how to look after yourselves. That's now available on our conference website. We also have the conversation sitting in there with Gemma Gardner from St Patrick's and Leanne Barlow representing Mighty, the JK Foundation program as well, that's focused on mental health in schools. And that's a fantastic conversation too around play and the JK Foundation work that they're doing. So please, take a look at those as well if you're interested in more about that. It does lead me into making this announcement as well around that self-care and that community that we're wanting to create. And so I did hint on Facebook tonight that I would have a little surprise to share, but keep a watch out this week. We're going to be going live with a new membership service over on our website where teachers can subscribe on a monthly basis, and they will have all of their month's resources sitting there related to a particular theme. And the theme for February is whanaungatanga, or connection. And what we've done is we've put together a whole load of play invitation ideas, language, connection to curriculum, all around the concept of whanaungatanga, or connection, that you can go in and have a look at and incorporate into your environment and into your planning, into your assessment, and so on. So we'll be making more announcements about that this week, and you'll be able to sign up and have access to that monthly membership service. And every month there'll be a new theme. But for this month, hopefully that connection theme, that important theme that we've talked about this evening, will be useful for you as well. So keep a watch out for that when we announce that on the 1st of February. So thanks, Meg and Keri, once again. I hope that you have a lovely week ahead and into the new year as well. And I look forward to seeing some photos of some useful ways of fabric being used, Keri. Love to see that.
I'll share them. It might even be Meg on a hammock.
That sounds perfect.
Or might be you in your fort.
I'll bring the crayons.
Oh, thank you so much, everyone, and we will chat again soon, Meg and Keri.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done, Sarah.
Thank you.